Hello, and welcome to my TED Talk. My name is Arthur Vargas, peer for Miss Marlowe, and this is my TED Talk on cars and motorcycles, how to maintain them, and how to tell what engine they have. Right here I have standing is my dad's 1970 Husqvarna WR360 and my 1996 Yamaha WR250. I'm going to be looking at today, for the first part of this series, is two-stroke motorcycles. I don't have any four-strokes, but two strokes will do the deal, because these bikes, as you can see, from 70 to 96 are exactly 26 years apart, and we're going to be comparing what they just have, and what are their similarities. So, camera woman, if you came closer, if we start looking at the 1970 Husqvarna, we can see that there's a clutch, brake, and that it has these fins on the motor block. As you can see, there's no radiator, and that it has a big pipe right here, but not as big as the 1996. This is an air-cooled bike. 360 means it's 360 cc's, and it runs on two-stroke from the single Mikuni Solex carburetor. As you can see, this is what you started with, and that you can also see from that bike to this bike that the controls are switched, because this bike is European, unlike that one, which is Japanese. This bike was made in Sweden, while that was made in Japan. As you can see also that this bike also looks a little bit shabby because it is also unrestored. This is an original survivor bike that my dad has had for many years. It may look a little bit ragged, but it can still have some fun on the trails. As it says right here, 8-speed. It's a desert bike, but it has a high and low gear, which is changed with this little gear shift right here. My camera woman can zoom in on it, and that it has a two-section tank, which is right here and right here. And it should say Husqvarna, but as I said again, it's also a little bit older. And as we see from back here and from the back, that it has dual shocks instead of the single shock from back here, because back then dirt bikes were just still evolving from street bikes. And also, as we can see from right here, that this has a gear case that's more rounded, a carburetor has a tickle screw, and then also that the gear shift is on this side, since that's again European opposed to this bike, which has only one shock in the back, the kicker's on the other side, and that this has a Kaishin carburetor instead of the Mikuni. As I will now do is I will now start this bike, and then progressively try to start up that one, since that one's been sitting for 2 years. Up to the cooler, and then you see the exhaust pipe, how it comes through all the way over here. If she was to walk, if the camera woman was to walk over onto the other side where I'm at, you can see that this bike has disc brakes, front and rear, and how this bike right over here has drums. You can see the technologically how much more advanced this bike is from that. And now what I will do is I will pull up the choke, turn on the fuel, and the key to getting a two-stroke bike to start is getting it right at top dead center. So right here, excuse me, I'm a little bit shorter, so I need a starting block. Push this turn off button. Start it again. Finally got this beast started up after 2 years. Let's see what we got. Showing my grandfather's 1939 Oldsmobile Series 60. Let me just make sure before we take a look at the engine and make sure it's in gear so it doesn't roll back. Alright, that'll do. So, camera woman, if you were to come up here, this car has a 95 horsepower, 216 inline 6 with a Rochester carburetor. It is a four-stroke motor, but I mean it runs on regular gas, but there's something special about it. Since this car was made before 1975, it runs on leaded gasoline, which means right under here are valves, since this is an overhead valve engine. Excuse all the dirt, this car hasn't been driven in around 5 years. As you can see, it has normal spark plugs as a normal car, but as you can see, the horns and all the wires are different because it runs on a 6-volt battery. And you can also notice on the other side that it doesn't have an alternator, it has a generator, and that how even just the radiator looks a lot different because it's just old school technology. This orange thing back here is the oil cup because they didn't have oil filter. It still has its toilet paper oil filter element since they didn't have regular oil filters in here. And that the air filter is a big cleaner, which means it isn't made out of any paper, it's made of all wire metal and steel. So when you go to clean it, you got to soak it in either gasoline or diesel fuel, and then you either can put it back in, or you soak it in transmission fluid so it'll be able to work again. So I'm going back here. You can obviously tell this is a 216, as I said before, because of the markings on the block. You can also tell on the other side that this is a Rochester carburetor because it has a tag that says Rochester. So if my camera girl wants to come around the other side, even if she could, if the lighting was good, she would be able to see the aftermarket Offenhauser head and intake manifold and exhaust manifold all at the same time. And how it has steel braided lines instead of rubber lines, just because it's an old car. And as you zoom around to the front of it, you can see how we have the horns right there, which are city horns. If they're a lot longer and they extended out to the point right there where the hood scoops are, it'd be called country horns. This car is made in Detroit, which is funny because it's a GM car, but it actually was. But it wasn't made by a car maker, it was made by coach builders, because there's a sign over here on the side. My camera was to come over. It was built by a coach builder because it has a coach right here on the side. And a lot of cars had that back in the day, since there was still nobody who would make bodies except coach builders, even in 1939. So you can zoom around to the other side, and you can see that there are white wall tires on this car because everybody knows that these cars are fancy. And then as you zoomed in more, that the things how to maintain this car would be plugs, plug wires, hoses, carburetor rebuild kits, since this carburetor has to be rebuilt since it's been sitting for so long, and then these water hoses, which are special, which you have to get from a special GM store. And that over there, that the battery you can get available at Napa Auto Parts. It's expensive, but you know what? It's less expensive than converting it to 12 volt. You can also see that the wires right here, they have to be changed out at least every couple of thousand of miles. Just because the radiator, how old technology it is, and now me and my dad don't want to change it back over, and sometimes fray these lines. We also have to replace, every time we do something, we always have to replace the oil filter and the oil filter element, which is inside of it, which is usually toilet paper or some type of paper element. Right here we have to make sure we have to change the gaskets on the head. We have to get this motor one day converted to unleaded gasoline, but leaded is the best it can do, because in a leaded engine, the valves are soft. So when it goes to hit up, that lead between hits that so they don't totally have total destruction or total meltdown for you young folks. As you can see right here, there's an external oil pump, and to check the oil in this thing, you just pull up this big old dipstick, because that goes straight into the oil pan. This car has a non-synchro mesh 3-speed manual transmission, or 3 on the tree. Doesn't have power brakes, and the clutch is operated with a spring. The same how this car has all drum brakes. They all activate on springs, so you can get brake fade if you're going above 40 miles an hour, but that's typical for an old car. You can also tell it's a lot more bouncier too. And that, these things have a lot wider fenders, even though this car only has a set of 16-inch tall tires. Over here to the motorcycle. Excuse our coats on it. When going to maintain this bike, you got to do stuff with the chain, which is on the other side. You got to replace the gaskets right here that connect to the muffler. Even though this doesn't have an expansion chamber, well, it's still bigger than stuff from back in the day. You got to usually change the gear oil and the gear oil gaskets. The carburetor has a certain seal right there and right there that you need to change constantly if you let it sit, because it will dry out because of this thing that's around 95 octane just for it to even start up in the morning. You have to change these gas lines right here, and as you can see right here on the motor, if the camera girl could zoom in right here on the front, that you notice that it has 2 spark plugs. That's because these bikes were made for nothing else than racing. The better spark you can get, and in the middle of a race, if you were to bike that was to die out to a foul spark plug, because not everybody would rev their engine real high, since this thing can rev up to at least 7,000 RPM for 1970, you just switch a plug and you'd still be good. This thing has high compression, and so you can't just run it on regular pump gas with mixed oil. You got to run it on 91 octanes, which is the highest you can get at the pump, and then you got to add octane boosters so you can raise it to 95 to 96. My bike over there on the outside, on the other hand, if the camera girl was to follow me, the lighting was to permit us, we can run on anything from 85 to 91, but it's preferred is 96. So we still add an octane booster to it. But as you can see, it's different. Air filters under the seat, which you take off with these bolts with the side plate. And then you can notice that the things that usually go on first are either the choke valve, the carburetor boot, the gaskets right there, and then either the head, clutches, or gear shift mechanism. The first thing to always go out is usually the gas line, because it usually gets frayed. As you can see, my tank's a lot bigger than that bike because it has the 5-gallon desert tank, since this bike is actually a desert racer. Well, before I had it. Another thing that has to be changed literally every couple of years are the radiator hoses. As you can see, these hoses already look a little bit old, but they do the job. Today I'm going to talk about something just as American as you or me. We're going to be talking about the muscle car and the pickup truck. First things first, we're going to be talking about the muscle car. As you can see by the poly tag sticker, that this is my 2001 Mustang GT convertible. As you can see by the Mustang logo, and then also the GT is on the side. And then also, if my camera girl was to go around the whole car, it has the torque thrust wheels, leather interior, 4-speed automatic, and only 114,000 miles. She can also see when she comes around the back that it actually says Ford, and it also says Mustang, and it has dual exhaust pipes, and a V8 engine with approximately 270 horsepower. As we go up this other side, we can see that this car is in pristine condition, that it is my pride and joy. This car has 4-wheel disc brakes, has Sumitomo tires, and it has extremely wide tires in the back for that extra grip. So that's saying that Mustangs can't go into corners, thing of the past. Let me show you guys the engine. Just a switch under the hood, like that. Put up with this little stick. This is your average 2001 Mustang 4.6 liter V8, which is 241 cubic inches. Not so far from the old 289 from the early Mustangs back in the 60s and 70s. This motor is 12 volt, it has power steering, power brakes, has air conditioning over there. You can also see how it has a whole bunch of other modifications like cold air intake, intake plenum, aftermarket injectors and all the other stuff, and aftermarket air filter. This car, we got it around 3-4 years ago, and I've been driving it as my daily driver ever since. I got this car even before I even turned 16. When it comes to maintaining this car, usually you just got to do power steering fluid, radiator fluid, trans oil, gear oil, differential oil, and then just gaskets. And also one thing that always goes out after 100,000 miles, even though this motor was new when we first got it, was always that the timing chain cover always cracks at the idler arm. What that is when you have your air conditioner on, or when you're at a stop, the arm goes up and down adjusting the idle. Without that, your car doesn't idle correctly. And so when we move on to down here or to the other side, if my camera goes to zoom in onto the brakes and the electrics, there's another thing that goes out when these cars get old is their electrics. They get really finicky. And so what happens is, since you can see the Motorcraft alternator and the Motorcraft battery, you can't have aftermarket like O'Reilly or AutoZone parts on it. Because when you do, sometimes they put out more output than they're expected, and these cars' electrics can't handle it. Like for instance, the radio. Just to even have some stuff back here, we have to put original parts, electrics, nothing aftermarket when it comes to radio and all that, because it will mess with the electrics really bad. Some cars may not have the problems with it. In this case, my car has it. And we can fix it. We fixed most of it. This car had a power drain when we first got it. It could not go 2 days without the battery going completely dead. After we put the Motorcraft battery and alternator, this car sat for 2 weeks over Christmas break, and it didn't go dead once. As we go on to the inside of the car, into the interior, we see that it has Mach 460 speakers, and that it has seats only 4. You see in the back, it's meant for 2 midgets in the back and 2 parents up in front, or maybe that's for kids. So we can see that another thing that usually will go out is the convertible rams, which are behind here, and the convertible top itself. If you do not take care of it with special protectant and lubricants, it's like skin, but it's vinyl, but it will dry out and crack. As I was saying before, the rams, me and my dad just changed out the hydraulic rams, which push the top up. Leaked oil everywhere. You have to change the seals, you got to change the rams, you got to change the lines, and sometimes you even got to change the hydraulic motor. Now if we go to the trunk, a lot of things that have to be replaced are the plastic panels, or these little push pins. As you can also see under here, you have things like the spare tire, the jack, and then just in case a pair of jumper cables. Let me shut that. Now what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to start up this car. My camera girl can go around to the front of the engine. That'd be perfect. As you can see, this car is in low perfect running order. It has aftermarket exhaust, heads, exhaust manifold, and cold air intake, which means car's a lot of fun. Now let's go over to the pickup truck. This car, or let's just say this truck, is a 1994 Ford F-150 XLT. The XLT means extended cab. It may look like a four-door, but actually that little cab part right there doesn't open. As you can also come a little bit closer, this truck is really bad shape because it's just my dad's work truck that we just use to haul stuff around. Oops, wrong keys. We look inside. It looks terrible. It's not bad. It's an automatic 4-speed transmission. Has 208,000 miles, and then it has cloth seating. This is what I meant by the extended cab. There's no door handle to open that up, but yet you see back there it seats 3. I don't know about comfortably, but it still seats 3. As we can still see back here, it still has its factory Rhino liner, which is a gazillion years old. Well, actually, it's 24. It has its one exhaust pipe out of here. See how it has a different tailgate. As I said again, it's a work truck, and then it actually has the optional alloy wheels instead of the hubcaps. This truck has drums in the back and discs in the front, which means this truck does not have anti-lock compared to my Mustang. It also has a bigger motor, but it has less horsepower. This truck has a 205 horsepower V8 engine. I think a lot of those horsepowers or horses have escaped since this truck has 208,000 miles. Let me raise the hood. This truck is all steel. Even though it's 1994 with electrics, it's still an all-steel truck. So that means very well that this truck has a very heavy hood. Unlike my car, when it has aluminum and some plastic parts and composite parts, this truck is all metal. As you can see, this is your 5-liter 302 V8. It has the mounting holes for if my dad wanted to replace the motor for a 460 or a 351 Windsor. It's because of mass production uses. When it comes to this truck, the things you just gotta usually change is the condenser, air filter, which is right over there. My dad put an aftermarket air filter to get a little bit of more horsepower out of it. The alternator. The alternator actually went out with me when I was at school, and I had to get a jump from one of my friends. Those can go out. They can last a long time, but when you're going to replace it, you can't get an aftermarket one. You got to get a Motorcraft one because, again, these electrics are real finicky. It has the dual barrel throttle body, which was still a fad thing back on Ford trucks back in the early to mid 90s. So you can see right here, EFI 5-liter Ford. This motor is extremely well, it's related to the Mustang 5-liter of 94, 95. But the only difference is this is a steel block, not an aluminum block. And also the heads. If you can see even down there, the heads are shaped differently. The heads are still more cast steel than cast aluminum. Which means instead of this motor, instead of revving up to 6,000 RPM, it only will rev up to 5,500. Even now, since it's an older motor, it will only rev up to even 4,500, and it won't rev past that. This truck is extremely slow, but even though it's slow, it can still tow. You can see how it has all metal bumpers. Most trucks today have those plastic bumpers, but you know what? If you hit something, you're not getting damaged. The other car is. Let me go around this other side. You can see how it has this extremely long handle right here for the jack. Now the jack is under the seat, because when it comes to lifting up this truck weighs a ton. Literally. Let me start it up. My camera goes to stay in the front. As you can see, everything is running just fine. That was probably one of the weakest V8 startups I've ever heard in my life. But you know what? My dad's not replacing this motor any soon, but it still does its own job of hauling stuff around. You can see right here how everything's spinning to the serpentine belt, to the timing chain. Well, that's more inner than the motor. This is an overhead valve engine, unlike the Mustang, which is a single cam. You can see in the motor how it had the 2 cam lobes up on top under the valve covers. That means the camshafts are right on top. This motor has the camshaft deep in the middle, right near those pulleys. You can see how the idle arm right there is in the middle, and then how this whole belt, the serpentine belt, spins the alternator, idle arm, air conditioner unit right there, and it's all driven by the crankshaft. The things you got to change on this are plugs, oil, coolant, transmission fluid, and battery, alternator, and air filter. Even mass airflow sensor. This truck has a weak mass airflow sensor and a weak starter, which is why it has the bad startup. This truck usually can sit 2 to 3 weeks before it needs a little bit of starting fluid shot right into these tubes. But it's an old truck. It only has one use. This is my dad's 2011 Honda CRZ Hybrid. As you can come right here, take a look at the motor. It has an inline 4, 111 horsepower, with a brushless electrical motor that has 15 horsepower. Approximately combined has 122. You can't see the electric motor because it's way down deep there right near the transmission, but you can still see the lines and all the electrical connections that go. And as it has the integrated motor assist, which is Honda's own way of saying it just has a hybrid. You see over here that it has an extremely small battery. And then if you just come down here, you can see all the lines and connections that hook up. So this car, it can get at least 40 mpg on the highway and at least 30 in the city. My dad drives his car to work. Let me start it up. As you can see, it's a very quiet car, and instead of having an actual starter, the AC brushless motor kicks over the motor forward, because actually with all the room in here, even though it's only 1.5, there's no room to do anything. There's not even any room to freaking do an oil change. You gotta get this thing taken to the dealership, where it has to have this Dexos oil, or GM's way of saying you can only use this oil, even though it's a Honda. But since it's been moved around globally, it has to use that oil, because after 2011, engines get more complex. As you can see right here, fuel injection gets a lot better. Gas mileage gets a lot better, which means cars need a better oil. This oil doesn't smoke when the motor gets old. And with this, all this stuff right here, with the intake and all the other stuff down there, just proves just how technology has come from an older Honda with fuel injection to this newer Honda with this integrated system. You see, this thing has an extremely small radiator. Then how the motor mounts are right here at the front and right at the back where the electrical motor is. My camera girl can do a whole walk around of the car. She can see how this car has very small wheels. How it's a very small car itself. It's a straight hatchback to where it just lifts up from back here. It has batteries in the back since it's a hybrid, but instead of being in the middle or in the side, it's right under the trunk, right around in this sub level. This car's a regenerative brakes to where right where the back brakes, so when you slow down, there's a little cable line that's right there between the brake caliper that clamps on when these clamp on, which charges up more electricity to charge the batteries. So you're not always running on engine power, which always would decrease fuel efficiency and fuel mileage. That's going to be it for this. Goodbye.